Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfic. This will be the continuation of Throw a Chair Through a Window and Call It a Day. This will be Part 9, Chapter 8, entitled, I Like When Things Are Crazy. Something good comes out of exhaustion. Being alone isn't the same as being lonely. When you're alone, it's because you chose to be. You chose to cancel all your plans, shut off your phone, settle down on the couch and spend the next 8 hours doing a movie marathon, regardless of the severe drop in quality by the third edition. You chose to separate yourself from others for a little while and enjoy some time alone with yourself, a person only you can access and analyze, where you can collect your thoughts and be who you really are. Even if who you really are is a piece of shit, like Vlad. It was your choice and no one else's, and Shota knows this because no matter how long you shut yourself inside your brain, how long you lock out the people around you behind a chain-shut door, there's still someone on the other side. Someone waiting with bated breath like an excitable puppy for your return, eyes flickering to the door every 5 seconds to see if you're ready to come out, knuckles gently and patiently knocking against the hard wood to coax you out. And more often than not, it works, if Vlad's disgusting love for an inferior animal such as a dog is anything to go by. So no, being alone is not the same as being lonely. Being lonely is when the knocking finally stops, when you've neglected the door for so long that it's rusted over and become so disgusting that even you can understand why no one else would want to stick by it anymore. And what's hilarious about all of this is that you don't realize you've become lonely until the shoulder you thought you could cry on covers itself with a black coat and shoves you off, until the hand, reaching out to help you up, tangles its fingers in your hair and throws your head back down against the concrete, until the car that you thought was your ride back home drops you off on the corner of a street and rides off into the distance, framed pictures, stuffed animals, bedtime stories, and whatever else was left of your old life being tossed out the window and left to rot. And he's not going to lie, it hurt a bit, seeing things he's cherished being treated as though they're worthless by people who don't even see the whole picture. Anything and anyone you ever thought you could depend on, trust, left you in the dust. So, ignoring the overly specific example, it's all very ironic. Almost as ironic as not realizing you aren't lonely anymore until someone picks at your capture weapon, says the durability and length are very admirable, and proceeds to yell, "That's what she said," and slaps your forearm as they cackle. That's what happened to Shota, at least, 15 years ago during one of the worst days of his life, but again, right at this very moment. And despite the breathtaking shock that came from that discovery, eyes microscopically widening, watching purple eyes tear up at the edges as they roared in laughter, he still had enough control over mind and body to grab Midoriya's peanut butter-covered apple slice right out of his hand and throw it at Nemuri's costume sleeve. The R-rated hero let out a strangled gasp, slapping the food item off her sleeve, but not without leaving an ugly brown-orange stain in its wake, and glared at the merciless underground hero. "You twiggy little bitch!" "My scarf, Nemuri. My scarf." Black eyes narrowed at the woman next to him in judgment and betrayal. "The one thing I told you never to make another dirty joke about ever again, and yet here the fuck we are. I hope it stains forever, you goblin. I'll ruin your laundry bill." And that's a promise. Shota knows firsthand just how horrible stains from certain substances can be on specific types of fabric. He can thank Majima and his poor eye coordination for that, and that's precisely why this is the best course of action for his war against Nemuri. "Well, excuse me for trying to find a little entertainment in my life, especially since it's obvious you aren't giving me any. Dragging me over here. You followed us. Taking up my break. I can't remember a single moment you taught this week. Or this month, actually. What do his students do during hero art history anyway? Find symbolic meaning based on the color palette of All Might's tacky costume? Connect Tensei's armor to the medieval time period? And being a stick in the mud with no compensation in return." Nemuri huffed with a pout and moved her hair behind her ears as she observed her surroundings. "Why are we even here? It's dark and it's dusty, and I haven't seen any cockroaches yet, but I'm nothing if not a believer. We couldn't have sat in the middle and not here?" "No, we couldn't. This is a strategic spot as far as he's concerned. His hero costume blends in with the shadows, effectively cloaking his presence. He's far enough away from the rest of the cafeteria tables that no one can hear anything he says, and he has a decent view of everyone else in the wide room. Perfect for people watching in the cafeteria. Especially since the rest of the teachers agreed that the hour before Nezu comes back should be considered a school-wide holiday, and therefore they should allow the students to casually converse with their friends as they enjoy these final, tranquil moments of peace of mind. He gets to observe them in their natural habitats, He doesn't exactly know why people watching is something he does on reflex now, or why he feels the need to psychoanalyze them based on just their appearance and behavior. But he's not going to start second-guessing himself after 20 years. Fine. Be a wallflower. Don't make it sound cute. But can you at least tell me why we're here? What course of action can you even accomplish in an hour? Especially since all you did for the last hour was pass around info that teenagers, heroes in training, should not be aware of. Shota is many things. He's sleep-deprived. He's an underground hero. He's on the Hero Commission's watch list for reasons they refuse to tell him. But most importantly, he's a heroics teacher. And if Midoriya has a question regarding the skills needed to become one, then who is he to deprive him of that? So yes, he will pass on the information. From where to access fake IDs to throwing knives at moving objects, regardless of how morally gray it is. Because that's the most logical decision, even if it ended with both of them getting a disappointed look from Hisashi due to them almost stabbing Vlad and giving Aoyama a heart attack. As well as steal company property, she continued, and yeah, okay, that's a valid concern. But if it's the last day of his and Midoriya's principal secretary gig, and the materials that were way too conveniently found in Nezu's office weren't going to be of use anymore, then what's the harm in taking them home? So yes, the Erasure Hero snatched some tea bags and maybe sort of shoved an entire box of notebooks and fancy mechanical pencils to Midoriya. Sue him. Nevertheless, he guesses Nemuri deserves some sort of context for their situation at the moment, but that doesn't mean Shota has to be the one to give it. As if it was second nature. Which, let's be honest, it definitely is at this point. The Erasure Hero turned to his green-haired student with an unspoken job in mind, only to be met with silence. The gruff man blinked at Midoriya. Midoriya blinked right back, and it went on like that for way too long. After a few agonizing seconds of his kid picking up another apple slice, dipping it in peanut butter, and slowly chewing and swallowing, he finally spoke up. I actually don't know. Ah, right, now he remembers. It's because he didn't tell him. I followed you even though I didn't know what was going on, mostly because Nezu isn't back yet, and I don't think I go back to classes until tomorrow, and, I stayed for the food. You know, now that Shota thinks about it, where does Midoriya keep getting all these snacks from? With a giant pile of chip bags, candy, and Jesus Christ, is that sushi? On the other side of the table, the kid looks like he's got a whole buffet next to him. Is he Lunch Rush's favorite or something? Why does he even bother asking this? Of course he is. If Shota's observations of the last 1.5 years are anything to go by, the number one spot in all of his co-workers' hearts is reserved by the kid. He's the only one who didn't flinch even the tiniest bit at Ectoplasm's face, the only one who comments about Midnight's costume, is focused on how to improve the efficiency of the shoes instead of public backlash, the only one who beat the support kids to the labs during the first week of school because he wanted Powerloader's autograph, and so on. Not to mention how he's All Might's unofficial kid, so really, it wouldn't be a surprise that he's Lunch Rush's favorite, too. He's everyone's. Except for Shota, that is, because he doesn't have favorites. It's more or less just who he hates the least. For example, he wants to burn Vlad alive. He's deeply disturbed by Nezu. He's annoyed by all his fellow co-workers and all hero students. He can tolerate his students a little more. He can go so far as to say he's okay with Nemuri's company. And Hisashi, he's not sure. Which is strange because he usually always knows, but his loud friend is somewhere up there. As for Eri, Shinso, and Midoriya, it's also quite strange. They aren't on the same level as his students because Mineta used to be his student and he wouldn't compare anyone to that. So that's out of the list of possibilities. They'll never be on the same level as Nemuri, Oba, and Hisashi because that's a relationship built on 15 years of nonstop nagging, sexual jokes, and being dragged to karaoke, so that's out of the way as well. And he can't hate them as much as he hates sunlight. He gave them all too many crayons, coffee, and notebooks for that to be possible, or worship them as much as he worships caffeine because he doesn't bring fellow humans into his religion. So they're sort of just there. They're there in a way that Shota can't find himself to be displeased at, but that doesn't mean they're his favorites, okay? Because it's just, well... Well, shit, Shota. I guess that means you'll have to... Nemuri placed a mock comforting hand on his shoulder, snapping him out of his thoughts and making him remember just how much he can still hate this woman despite her being his friend. Explain it yourself. He sighed as Midoriya gave him a justified, pitying look. Yeah. The underground hero spared one last second feeling sorry for himself because of the company he chooses to keep around before jumping right back into his regular blunt self. This is an interrogation. He would have brought out a clipboard or something at that, maybe take some inspiration from Ida and Midoriya, or for the sake of accuracy of what he's about to do, Todoroki. But he's nothing if not a mess of a human being, so he whips out a crinkled post-it note with his usual lazy scrawl on it. Midoriya gasped. "Oh, me too!" "Okay, what?" His kid opens the brown messenger bag, the same one that brings out a tingly sensation in the back of Shota's brain, remembering last Wednesday when he first gave it to Midoriya before they did the medical staff interviews, and pulls out another notebook. "No one told me what was happening today, so I made a small list." What the hell counts as small? "Of questions I've wanted the answers to for the last 1.5 years, but I've never had the chance to ask. I was going to say this before Midnight Sensei asked, but I showed Lunch Rush first, and he said that forcing info out of my teachers wasn't exactly Passalter of me. But that's absurd because I wasn't going to interrogate you guys. I was just going to do a slightly more intense and focused interview." Shota thought the kid would have realized how horrible interviews are by now, especially after that whole Hironori fiasco last week. The underground hero shivered at the thought. It wasn't an experience he'd like to repeat. "I hope you know that changing the words makes it sound more threatening," Namuri said. Midoriya tilted his head as if he was genuinely confused, which he probably was, and oh my god, what kind of misunderstandings must this have caused in the past? "Last time you mentioned slight emotional manipulation of peers, I think Majima died a little bit on the inside." "Huh?" "Well," the green-haired boy stuck his tongue out in thought before jolting in his seat like a bulb lit up over his head. "What about extremely thorough observations and control over a friend's mental state and functions?" "This is just sad." Shota silently shook his head and watched as the boy made an O shape with his mouth before scribbling something down in his notebook again, giving the erasure hero an idea. "Tell you what," he started, drawing both of the other occupants' attention, one of them looking on in interest and the other fearing for her life over what Shota might suggest. "In the not-so-wise case that I ignore everything Lunch Rush said, I'm still not going to let go of my post-it note of questions, and I highly doubt you will either." The boy nodded, confirming his theory. "So how about this? For every question I ask, you have the chance to ask one too." Midoriya narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean by chance?" "As long as the question isn't about the whole Tsukuuchi story where the windows had red rum on it and the chairs were vandalized." The green-haired boy quickly crossed out a line in his notebook, and Shota nodded because he knew it. "Or whatever happened to that Yakuza member you saw on the security camera." Another crossed-out line. "Or the question Majima asked about my hair in the UA yearbook." The kid ripped out the whole page. "Then I'll answer." "I still think this is rigged against me, but sure." That's the spirit. Shota opened his mouth to read out the first question he had. To recite John Mulaney's quotes. Who knows? Certainly not him, because he never got the chance to speak when a loud slap noise echoed around as Midoriya held a hand over his nose. "I call dibs!" "Little shit," the underground hero muttered, dropping the post-it note again before raising his voice back to his regular volume. "All right, shoot." The green-haired boy gave a feral grin. He doesn't even know he's doing it, as he turned to the halfway mark in his notebook, and suddenly Shota realized something. He made another horrible mistake. "Besides winning the sports festival, did you need anything else to gain admission to the hero course?" Shota raised an eyebrow. That was certainly a much simpler question than he was expecting. "Winning the sports festival definitely wasn't easy, but I can't see Nezu letting in a student purely because of that." Well, he's not wrong. Good grades, a clean record for obvious reasons, a stable-ish income because they didn't provide uniforms back then, and the erasure hero winced. Lessons with the psychotic rat himself. The superpowered boy's eyes widened to the size of saucers, and Shota became very aware of the fact that you can't just be vague with Midoriya. It simply wasn't within the range of possibilities. Anything you say can and will lead to a flood of calculated questions, whether he decides to ask you straight up or investigate on his own. And while he knows it's a great skill, he forgot that it's also an unbiased skill, a skill that will aim its viridian green eyes at him the moment it gets an opening. And right now, there was one hell of an opening. "Good grades in every class, or the ones that could possibly be related to hero work," the boy pressed. "Physical education was probably a key factor, regardless of what type of hero the student was trying to become. Same goes for all core subjects in health, but hero art history." Namuri held a hand over her heart, and Midoriya quickly flapped his hands around so much that Shota could just hear the, "I didn't mean it that way. It's a very necessary subject. I just don't think it's related directly to field and office work." The R-rated hero must have heard the same thing, quickly dropping the subject with a wave and an inflated ego. Shota huffed in subtle amusement, but answered nonetheless. "Surprisingly, every subject, even creative writing, despite the fact that all we learned there were symbolic meanings of flowers to use in stories. It seemed unreasonable, since I know for a fact another Hero Course kid was failing science. He hesitated, for a millisecond, thoughts circling his head at alarming speeds. Maybe it was because he was the only transfer student they'd ever gotten, or because the prefecture he's from wasn't exactly sunshine and rainbows when it came to crime rates. But whenever school matters came to him instead of his other classmates, the teachers just had unusually high standards. Nomuri nudged him with her shoulder, and for some unknown reason he returned the action. Midoriya nodded down at his notebook, jotting everything down and seemingly oblivious to Shota's strange inner conflict. But judging by the microscopic twitch of his finger, the underground hero doesn't doubt that he was able to catch the slight pause in his answer, or that the kid already had a list of mental questions about that split second of silence alone. It was just like Shota said. The skill was unbiased, with uncontrollable inquiries, but that didn't mean the kid himself didn't have self-restraint when it came to verbally asking them. And that's something Shota would forever be grateful for, even if he didn't realize it yet. The boy finished writing down his answer to the question, opening his mouth to ask another one, but the black-haired man jabbed a finger in his direction before he could speak. Nope, my turn. It was already a stretch letting you ask 2 questions at once. Midoriya gave a high-pitched squawk in retaliation, and Shota took that as an opportunity to continue. What are the contents of a random page in that notebook? You have UA statistics and negative consequences of alcohol consumption in there at all times. For all I know, you have Hero Commission secrets too, and frankly, I could use some more blackmail. Well, I wouldn't really call it blackmail so much as an extra incentive to... The kid cut himself off as Nomuri's pale-as-a-ghost complexion, making another O shape with his mouth and going to write something down before remembering that's what the whole question was about. With a shrug of his shoulders, he slid the book over to Shota's side of the table and watched as the black-eyed man flipped to a random page and began to read its writing out loud. I'm not sure why Aizawa-sensei and Midnight-sensei haven't considered marketing themselves as a hero duo yet. Huh? Nomuri spat out her vodka. Are you kidding me? And gave a wide-eyed stare at the notebook. In the hypothetical situation where Aizawa-sensei realized he didn't hate sunlight and publicity as much as he thought and became a daytime hero, or Midnight-sensei thought working at night and underground would fit easier into her daytime drinking preferences, this would logically be the most ideal team-up for a variety of missions. Midnight's attacks are mainly long-range, while Aizawa-sensei would most likely manage both with the excessive amount of knives he has in his utility belt, meaning they could make up for any weaknesses the other person had. But most importantly, even though it's not confirmed if Aizawa actually has insomnia, or rather just has no time to sleep even if he wanted to, Midnight's somnambulist quirk could easily provide him with the sleep he probably desperately need. Thanks. Also, why the fuck haven't we considered that yet? Shota asked the purple-haired woman incredulously. Becoming a hero duo? She asked, and Midoriya looked back and forth between them as if this was the origin story to the most counterproductive team ever, and he had his first-class tickets to the show. No, I hate cameras too much for that, and you would never give up the ability to go to nightclubs. I mean using your quirk at all those times I wanted to sleep but drank too many 5-hour energy shots to do it. It's not his fault the police officers gave him the incorrect amount of time he needed to stay awake for a case. He sighed. What a wasted opportunity. Nonetheless, he flipped to another random page. Aizawa, the hell did you do to Snipe? Midnight. Oh, you know, a little wine and dine the regular. Aizawa, you realize it's only 1:30 in the afternoon, right? Midnight. Hey, anything in or near the... Shit, you recorded that part? Midoriya nodded. Hey, wait a second. Aizawa. Julia Roberts was iconic in that movie, but prostitution is still illegal in Japan, and claiming they were only cosplaying as her doesn't seem like it'll get the officers off their back. Izuku. But how are you supposed to tell who's cosplaying and who isn't? Aizawa. Well, the movie was made over a century ago, so if they can even say the name Vivian with total confidence, then that'd probably be a surefire way to tell. Also, how is this related to buying a Kamui Woods hoodie? He read out, his and Nomuri's eyes going even wider at Midoriya's nonchalant expression. Why the hell does the boy look so confused? Does he not realize how this accurate of a recollection wasn't exactly average? I saw you and Shota leave yesterday, and you definitely didn't have your notebook with you, so how'd you remember and log down what everyone said? Nomuri asked, mystified. Shota could relate, eyes still roaming over the page. Why wouldn't I? The boy asked, looking at them in confusion. Right after that, I said, I was looking at manual hero hoodies, not Kamui Woods right next to it. Never Kamui Woods. And Aizawa-sensei said, I have so many questions. And Yumihara, the cashier lady, said, No, let him speak. We need more manual appreciation. And Aizawa-sensei said, Is that why over half of this aisle only sells posters with his face on it? And then she pointed her finger at him and said, You saw nothing. Shota looked back up at the forest-eyed boy who was currently nodding at his past self's words about Kamui Woods. He was going to take a wild guess and say the boy was still slightly resentful about the sludge villain mishap, which Shota can totally get behind. The pettier he is, the easier it'll be to convince him to think of revenge scenarios. But that's not the point. If I couldn't remember that, then there's no way I could have remembered everything I saw in hero fights. Occasionally my notebooks would get exploded and I'd have nothing on me when I saw a hero and a villain on the streets. Tread very carefully, Bakugo. The only thing more unbiased than Midoriya's questions is the effort I'm willing to use to carry out an elaborate revenge plan. So I have to mentally log down all their movements and special move names, or else I wouldn't have half the info I do now. The underground hero was baffled, regardless of whether or not his resting bitch face of an expression showed it. Midoriya's skill is the vast amount of information, theories, and questions he's able to generate from fights he watches or engages in on short notice. But to be able to do all of that from nothing but a memory of the event, just how detailed and vivid were these memories? He was still caught up in his mind when suddenly a hand was pulling at his collar to bring him down to Nemuri's level. "Shota," she whispered through gritted teeth, an apprehensive expression taking over her features. "I don't care who you have to insult, blackmail, or murder." Neither did he on a daily basis, but why is she bringing this up now? "Just do whatever you can to keep that boy away from Nezu. That skill combined with analysis is rare, and Midoriya has it. And what Midoriya has, Nezu will want. And you've seen firsthand what Nezu does to get what he wants. You were one of them." The underground hero froze at her words. Midoriya's analysis was a coveted skill, yes, no doubt wanted by many heroes and villains alike. Heroes wanted it to improve upon themselves during fights, and villains wanted it to defeat heroes during those fights. That's why Nemuri's words were so chilling, because Nezu was neither. Nezu had his own motivations for getting his paws on those he deemed had potential. Shota would know. And to this day, no one is able to decide whether it's to nurture those minds or brainwash them into his own personal army of sadists. Even Shota can't tell which one happened to him. But is that what's going to happen to Midoriya? Is Nezu going to trick the kid into thinking that private lessons with him every Tuesday and Thursday is a good learning opportunity? That glaring at people into submission is a perfectly normal habit to have? That hacking into corporations' databases for blackmail on certain businessmen is an innocent little practice exercise that will definitely not have its results leaked and ruin their lives in 2 to 3 business days? Okay, he'll admit he's getting a bit too specific, but still. It's not that the black-haired man hated the lessons he had with the rat. He's mature enough to know that it was useful in the long run and that he at least got free tea while he was there. But sometimes at 3 a.m, when he's contemplating his existence and wondering what he would do differently if he could go back in time, he can't help but toy with the idea that maybe he should have refused to partake in some of Nezu's lessons. Maybe he shouldn't have obeyed the order of trying out all the newly learned intimidation techniques on his teachers and classmates. Maybe he shouldn't have forced himself to watch everything from mind-numbingly depressing movies to gut-wrenchingly disgusting documentaries on the world's worst villains just so he could try to maintain control of his facial expressions and show nothing but a mask of blankness. Maybe he should have just said no. But he guesses he wasn't quite as good at it back then. And looking at the green-haired boy right now, oblivious to how painful it is for everyone else to watch him sacrifice his own needs for the sake of others' happiness, he can tell the kid has that same weakness. And if there's one thing Shota realized at that moment, it's that he wouldn't let Nezu take advantage of that. He wouldn't let the boy become the same emotional husk of a person like so many claimed him to be. He wouldn't let himself be the cause of the kid's future regrets. He also realized that he talks too much like a cheesy mama bear. Ugh, gross. And that All Might and Mrs. Midoriya may beat him and each other to death for parental rights, not that he considers himself a parent. But speaking of parental rights, Shota gave a discreet but firm nod to Nemuri before speaking again. Supernatural memory aside, who the hell is your fa? The kid slapped a hand to his nose and Shota sighed for about the billionth time this week. I regret the system I designed. Go ahead. Midoriya snickered evilly to himself. When the fuck did he start doing that? And slid his notebook back over to him, flipping the page after page after. Shota choked. On the page displayed, it was easy enough to see the title on the very top written in neat, bold letters. Aizawa Shota, Eraserhead. The title itself wasn't what tripped the underground hero up, though. Instead, it was the unnaturally detailed pencil sketch of him right under it that had Nemuri doing a double-take. With every new page, it was a different subsection, ranging from basic likes and dislikes to what his role would be if he was kidnapped and sent into a murdering game, which, by the way, was the person who knew who it was and provided evidence but because of that was accused of being the killer and left to die. And if that's not the most accurate depiction of what would happen, he doesn't know what is. He also doesn't know why he didn't consider the possibility that Midoriya had also analyzed him at some point, like any other hero he comes across, instead of only focusing on daytime heroes. Finally, the kid stopped at the final page. Theories. Oh, for fuck's sake. 1.5 years have been building up to this. If Midoriya turns into Todoroki and mentions Eri, he will quit this god-forsaken job before Nezu has time to take it from him. As everyone knows, your hair and scarf float when you activate your quirk. At first, I considered the possibility that your scarf had the technology to be linked to its user's brainwaves, but after asking May and Powerloader a few questions and asking them for blueprints of both yours and Shinso's capture weapons, I was wrong in 2 ways. First, only Shinso has that kind of technology specifically implemented into his capture weapon, and second, Midoriya's eyes sparked. Yours doesn't even have any technology. It's just a regular capture weapon made of steel wire alloys because, according to the records I found in the lab, you rejected the need to have carbon nanofibers woven into them. You didn't need it because, for some reason, you already found a way to control it without the technology, and no one ever questioned it. You also rejected it because, and I quote, "Why the hell would I pay money for that? I'm not a billionaire, you money-leeching Jimmy Neutron-looking ass." It's on the record. All right. He remembers that. Yeah, I barely had a stable income, let alone Yaoyorozu income. After that, I needed more ways to explain why you were able to control it, and that's where the hair comes in, Midoriya continued. No one knows why your hair floats, and according to Recovery Girl, she passed it off as some side effect of your quirk that didn't have any reason for existing. The same with the red light that appears in your eyes when you activate Erasure. But that can't be true, because during the training camp last year, I was able to catch a quick glimpse of your fight with Dabi, and the light wasn't just in your eyes, but around the entire top portion of your body. After that, I started observing the light more, and I noticed that sometimes the streaks of it would appear near the roots of your hair, as well as the areas where your scarf made contact with your neck. So, what would you say if your floating hair and red eyes aren't just a random side effect, but a key part of your quirk? I'd say I was very deeply disturbed and betrayed. Shota blinked, Midoriya blinked back, and suddenly the rambling continued. There are many cases where people have secondary quirks, like Todoroki and Setsuna. So what if that's what you have? A secondary quirk of telekinesis? The physical embodiment of the quirk being the red light, which, as I said last week, can spread around to cover multiple parts of your body, and not just your eyes. It would explain the floating hair, why you're able to float and control your scarf without carbon nanofibers, and why sometimes the top of your hero costume floats too. If that's the explanation, then maybe, if you started acknowledging that it's a secondary quirk, you could train it to eventually have the red light cover surface areas beyond just your body, and what is making physical contact with your body. You could float knives. When Midoriya finally stopped his analysis monologue, it gave Shota the chance to get a full grasp of the situation. First, the green-eyed boy looked like a mad scientist at the moment, pencil tucked behind his ear, and under a messy bush of hair, hands twitching as they pointed at several diagrams on the notebook, eyes blown wide and faintly shaking from being open too long. Second, Nomuri got increasingly overwhelmed by the pure amount of information pouring out of Midoriya's mouth before finally snapping at the word carbon nanofibers and sprinting away from the table to call for backup, get a glass of water, and pray to Zeus, something like that. The reason the underground isn't sure, when he usually would be, is because at the time, and a little bit of right now, he's having quite a difficult time processing thoughts other than, did he say telekinesis? And what the fuck, what the fuck, what the fuck? And he was serious about the red light. And after a few minutes of blankly staring at the wall behind the boy, he hates eye contact with people, if it's anything besides glaring, okay? He's not nervous or anything, it just makes him uncomfortable. He finally spoke. How much time and effort did you spend developing this theory? Theory, because he's refusing to break his own mind, even thinking of it as an answer. Longer than usual, Midoriya said quietly, and stared off into space as he slowly started to gain his sanity back, and the mad scientist faded away. That's either 5 minutes or 10 hours. It did take longer than I would have liked to interview May, Powerloader, and other medical professionals. Todoroki too, but just because he had a cool format for his theory notebook and I wanted to try it out. That's valid. Right. And why do you know so much about telekinetic quirks? My mom uses her attraction quirk a lot to grab tissues when she cries. Oh, would you look at that? It runs in the family. But also to float knives when she cooks. The boy waved his arms around like a wizard, casting spells to mimic his mother floating sharp weapons. And the mad scientist is back. As much as the theory would be enjoyable, purely for the sake of scaring Vlad by pouring pig's blood on myself and telekinetically slamming doors shut like Carrie White. Alas, I do not have it. My quirk erases other people's quirks. The floating hair and capture weapon thing is just as Recovery Girl said, a random side effect with minimal usefulness. Maybe, but maybe not. The boy flipped to the next page. It's more likely than I had assumed to receive a false quirk classification from doctors, or more accurately, a less accurate classification. Just last week there was an article published on a 7-year-old girl who was told she had an empathy-type quirk, where she could absorb the feelings of others to experience it herself, but an incident at her school the next day proved that the type of emotion she absorbed affected the speed of her metabolism. It was never discovered because it seemed so subtle and unrelated, but it tied into the key essence of her quirk. And besides, Midoriya continued, regardless of whether it's true or not, it's still a good idea to run a test on it. Either for the sake of science or the sake of scaring Vlad again, both are valid motives. And I'm willing to bet that you'll say you won't before you actually do later today, because if you don't, you know you'll be going against your own words of using your full potential to be a hero. But alas, because you wouldn't pass up the opportunity to have a more efficient way of pranking Vlad. Just because it's true didn't mean he had to say it. The underground hero narrowed his eyes at the boy. You've gotten too cheeky. Midoriya flashed a thumbs up and yelled an enthusiastic, right? If only to prove Shota's statement. In all honesty, though, the black-eyed man didn't know whether or not he should think too deeply about this little theory, since there are only 3 possibilities for how this could work. The first one would be to not try out the theory completely because of spite and wanting to prove the boy wrong about his analysis of Shota's future actions, which, yeah, sounds pretty immature now that he thinks about it. The second one would be to test it out and have nothing happen, which would give a blow to not only his dignity and pride, but a blow to his hope, he guesses. Is it hope, though? He can't imagine ever actually wanting a newly discovered complementary quirk to have to struggle and train with, to have to completely take apart and learn as if he was 4-year-old again. He's never known himself to be the type of person to care about how cool a quirk is. All he cared about was whether or not they'd get harassed for it. The third option would be to try it out and have it work. God, how the hell would that go down? He focuses on a mug of coffee and realizes he can move things with his mind. Great, now what? Because all he can think about is staring at that floating item and thinking about how if he was just a regular student again, he would have been praised for it, adored even. They'd do whatever he asked of them, asked of the world, and kiss the ground he walked on, the ground being the kids who weren't as lucky as he was, because that's the kind of messed up world they live in. When people see a strong quirk, they paint them as a god, and he hates it. And if the sickening idea of being pampered wasn't bad enough, he'd have to live with this newfound quirk forever with the knowledge that everything he did, everything he went through, was for nothing. It's like if Midoriya suddenly realized he had a quirk after all this time, and no, he's not referring to One for All, the corpse-carrying ball of power. Say it was, he didn't know, an analysis quirk. If after all this time he realized he had an analysis quirk, then he'd see the 10 years of abuse he faced from classmates, teachers, or just strangers on the street didn't have to happen. The burns, the bruises, the trauma, because he knows there's trauma. The harsh words, the glares, and all the feelings of inadequacy could have been spared, but weren't because of a doctor's slip-up. He'd also have to see that this analysis wasn't even of his own merit, but a quirk. And if in the end, Shota finds out he has a minor telekinesis quirk, that would be him. Just thinking about it made Shota want to punch something, but while a part of him wished he never heard this theory, the other, more rational part of him realized it was for the best. He doesn't blame Midoriya for telling him, because how could he? He chose to literally kidnap the kid from class to be a secretary this week, and along the way might have unintentionally taught him to focus on his analysis a bit more instead of just his strength. Focus on being a kid and thinking through what kind of hero he wants to be instead of limiting himself to being the next symbol of peace, as All Might had put it in Midoriya's story. That's on him, and he doesn't regret it for a second, because look at him. The boy's finally starting to see that his notebooks, never-ending questions and muttering aren't a weakness like everyone tried to beat into him, but rather a strength. And now, and this entire week really, now that he thinks back on every single course of action they'd completed, that mindset had been broken down enough to let out what the kid had been suppressing this whole time. Confidence, pride, because he deserves to feel proud of his skills and confident in them enough to share them with others, just as he did with Shota right now. So no, he doesn't blame Midoriya, and yes, this was for the best. Because maybe the treatment he went through as a kid, and even sometimes as an adult, didn't have to happen if he happens to have this new minor quirk, but it did, and he has to live with that. He'll use that experience, he'll use the memories he almost wishes he could forget, and he'll let that motivate him into training the living shit out of this hypothetical telekinesis quirk. He'll train and he'll work until he's satisfied, because that's what he's always done. That's how he proves to himself that in spite of the possibly meaningless harassment from others, he's still standing. And he's not going to let a stupid little floaty quirk take that away from him. He's not going to let anything or anyone influence his potential to be the best hero he can be. Nope. Shove a sock in it, brain. No more speeches. You're starting to sound a little too much like Midoriya whenever he gets into an inspirational rant with his classmates. Well, his subconscious whispered, I guess it's not just Midoriya who picked up a couple of strange habits this week. Seriously, though, he most likely doesn't have a minor telekinesis quirk. he said instead, way too casually considering that whole mental TED talk he had for a few milliseconds. Here's hoping it's not another quirk and only limited to my hair and my scarf. Don't want to give Lad any more ammo against me. Sure, he could spook him with the Carrie references, but the red light, floating powers, and telekinesis is starting to sound a little too much like Scarlet Witch from that old and surprisingly pre-quirk era movie. Ahead of its time for all the weirdest reasons. But regardless of that, I'm going to try and forget everything you said. Midoriya whispered a small, anguished, "No," under his breath. Nope, I'm 15 years your senior. You don't get the privilege of giving me, of all people, another existential crisis. I gave you a crisis before? That shouldn't even be a question. It happens almost every week, the most recent one, until now, being all the questionable things you said about your neighbors. Note to self, look into police reports about Dad decapitating Daiichi. The one before that being One for All, the one before that being everything about Bakugo. The boy had the decency to look at least a little bit sheepish. And the one before that being anything you have said ever about your dad. The boy paused in the action of rubbing the back of his neck to give Shota a confused look. Huh? My dad? Midoriya tilted his head, and it might have been the most kitten-like thing he's done in the last year. Not the point. Yes, and that brings me to my last question. Shota crumpled the paper and threw it to the side. The less evidence of the possibly confidential answer to his question, the better. Who the ever-loving fuck is your dad? At first, he just assumed the worst about Midoriya's dad. Nothing personal, just a habit he has. And could anyone really blame him? During parent-teacher conferences and family events, it was only Inka Midoriya that ever showed up. And as he said before, he didn't check the files of his students. So, of course, he came to the logical conclusion that the father was either unknown, a donor, a divorcee, a deadbeat, or, well, dead. Nothing he cared about, really, since it's clear Midoriya hadn't cared either. But then the boy just had to drop the bomb that he learned how to do the frankly terrifying glare, and note that he does not use that term lightly, from his father. And it was from that point on that Aizawa subconsciously took note of every detail he heard about his father. First was the unnaturally effective glare, which even Shota would be envious of if he didn't already trademark his own. Next was the fact that the man had apparently provided his kid with all the resources he needed to develop his analysis skill, which the underground hero has tons of respect for, even if he had never met the man. The third was that he analyzed quirks on his own and was more interested in them than Midoriya, which, once again, is nice, but utterly terrifying at the same time. The fourth was that his father regularly conversed with known criminal neighbors, although, given the fact that his literal sunbeam of a kid does too, he doesn't know if he should find it concerning or not, especially since Midoriya described it as looking more like business meetings than a Thanksgiving dinner. And finally, he had a name, Hizashi Midoriya. Why? The green-haired boy asked innocently. Shota gave a deceivingly casual shrug. Why not? Is that a trick question? Only if you go with the answer that won't give me nearly as much information as I need. So I'll repeat. Who, or what, is your father? He can't rule out the possibility that the father is simply a demon. That'd be very unscientific of him. The forest-eyed boy seemed to weigh his options for a few seconds before cheerfully responding. His name's Hizashi. This is a perfect example of an answer that has not met my excessive standards for information. Well, he has a fire-breathing quirk. If Shota had just read the fucking files, he could have figured out One for All a year earlier, because how the hell would fire and telekinesis make super strength? I don't have all the details, but I know he owns some sort of organization where people pay them to analyze quirks. He has white hair, his favorite book is 1984, he can't handle spicy foods, and, oh, he hates heroes. Pardon? Let me get this straight. Your dad, your biological father that you inherited half your DNA from, does not like heroes. Is that correct, or am I going deaf at an early age? Can't stand them. I remember he sulked for a whole day because All Might's fight was the only thing the news channels were talking about. He avoids hero-themed cafes like the plague. Every time we FaceTime each other, and he sees a new piece of hero merch on me, he excuses himself to scream in a separate room before coming back. Anytime I mention them, he tries to smoothly transition the conversation into a speech about how heroes nowadays are over-glamorized, in it for the wrong reasons and contributing to the stigma surrounding villainous quirks, mutant quirks, and the quirkless. Now this was interesting. Shota agrees with the man on all points made, but he still doesn't think he could ever hate heroes. He doesn't like agreeing with his past teachers, but he admits it's quite a strong word to use against the most idolized figures of their society. He doesn't like how they're in it for the fame or the money or if they're overall jerks, but as long as they can do their job without getting themselves or others killed in the process, that's good enough for him. Does Hisashi agree, though? What exactly has to happen to a person to make them hate heroes? Did he have a bad run-in? Was someone he was close to not saved by them in time? There's so many possibilities, but no matter which one it is, his real concern lies in how the father reacted to Midoriya's chosen career path. Judging by the kid's last statement, his father is quite the advocate for anti-quirkism. Admirable, to say the least. But if he hates heroes to the point where he's physically repulsed by them, then what was his opinion on Midoriya's dream job? What was his opinion on the fact that the boy actually managed to do it, and do it all through UA of all places? And most importantly, what was his opinion on the boy's newfound super-strength quirk? Speaking from experience, Shota can say with 100% certainty that all kids who have been hated on because of their quirks have ended up hating those with stronger or more heroic quirks quite often. Hell, even he had a period in his life where he wanted to slap the shit out of All Might because of his stereotypical high school jock appearance and golden boy quirk status. Oh, and he hates All Might. I mean, of course he still wants to slap the shit out of him. It's just for different reasons now. It's more about the man's inability to properly explain his infinite wisdom than his perfect quirk, but Shota also knows that some people don't grow out of it as much as he did. Some carry that hate all the way to their deathbeds, maybe even beyond, if the fucking afterlife actually exists, and it's well within the possibility that Hisashi Midoriya fits within that group of people. Is it justified? No, because the guy has a fire-breathing quirk, and he knows for a fact that ever since Endeavor's debut, those people are considered gold. But that won't stop the man from possibly shunning his kid for the changes he went through these past few years. Maybe the only reason Hisashi taught Midoriya quirk analysis was that he wanted his child to take after him. Maybe he wanted him to stay quirkless. So, put simply. But does he hate you? See, this is why he shouldn't be allowed around children. Because of my being a hero student in One for All? Nah. Oh, thank God. In fact, he was unusually happy about it. I knew I couldn't keep a secret from him, since it just felt wrong. So I just said I developed my quirk at random, and I was attending UA. I half expected him to burn himself alive, but instead he just stared at me for a full minute before beginning to laugh. And when I say laughing, I don't mean like a chuckle. I mean a full-on belly laugh that had him wheezing. I know he wasn't laughing at me, because he never does that, but he sounded victorious for some reason. Not because he was relieved I got a quirk. He's always been super supportive of my quirkless status, but I think he was relieved that if I did have to randomly develop a quirk out of nowhere at 14, he was glad it was this. Really glad, even. Personally, I think it's because he was excited to analyze a whole new quirk, especially one that has 6 others stored inside of it. But yeah, he laughed about the quirk, told me to give All Might hell, and wished me good luck. He still hates all other heroes, though. He's right, that sounds like quirk analyzer heaven. Good to know. It'd be a shame if someone found out he was prejudiced against his own kid and decided to murder him for it. The underground hero said simply. The green-haired boy laughed. I don't think that would happen. Midoriya's chuckles dialed down, and in a quiet but very concerned voice, continued. It wouldn't happen, right? Right? Anyway, he began, pointedly ignoring the wide-eyed look from Midoriya. Where is he exactly? Oh, he's just working overseas at the moment, and for the last 12 years. Midoriya seemed to realize how depressing that sounded, as he quickly added. He calls every week, though, and he sends gifts on birthdays and holidays. Well, that's certainly more wholesome than I was expecting. What was he expecting, really? A crime lord? A Yakuza leader? Probably, but at least he wasn't a demon. That's what Kachan and Shochan said when I told them the same thing, Midoriya said, pressing a finger to his cheek in true Asui-like fashion. Shota was about to go along with it until finally the words had fully processed in his brain, and he was left with even more questions than before. You finally put Shan behind someone other than Bakugo's name? Who's Shochan? It just sounds weird coming out of his mouth. How does Zashi do this every day? Oh, right. Zashi. Oh, it's Todoroki. Oh my God. Yesterday he was telling me his theories again, and he must have had an awakening about a new idea or something, because next thing I know, he's throwing the notebook at the floor and yelling that I have to call him Shochan for scientific purposes. I think he mentioned Kachan at some point. Who's to say? Oh my God. I don't exactly know what he's testing. Todoroki is an evil genius, and Shota can't wait to give him extra credit in class for this. But he seems very passionate about it, and I'd hate to get in the way of his project. Only when the underground hero was sure he wouldn't make a suspiciously mischievous smile at the explanation did he finally speak. Well, it's understandable that he'd be disappointed. He still thinks All Might is your father. That's the thing, though. Lately he's stopped talking about All Might. Pardon? Midoriya chuckled at the thought, oblivious to his dark-eyed teacher's pain. I think he found someone else to be my theoretical dad. Wonder who it is. Shota takes it back. Todoroki isn't an evil genius. He's just evil. A mystery for the ages, he rasped out, earning a brief weird look from the boy. But besides Shochan, why the hell was Bakugo disappointed? Apparently, Bakugo and Inka Midoriya have gossip sessions every now and then. Is she oblivious to the bullying that used to take place, or is this just some long-term strategy for revenge? If it's the latter, then he guesses he just gained more respect for this family, so it's a possibility that the topic of Hisashi Midoriya came up at some point. Maybe the woman ranted about marital problems, who knows? But all those comments, when taken out of context, could eventually lead to Bakugo forming some theories and questions of his own, and being curious enough about them to actually ask the son of the woman himself. Still, that doesn't give an answer to why he was disappointed. Did he actually want the man to be a deadbeat? You know how Kacchan and I used to be best friends? Same for his mom and my mom? He didn't know that last one, actually. Well, since we were all so close to each other, he would hang out at my house a lot for playdates. It's why we think of each other's moms as aunts. Hence the gossip sessions, which still sounds strange to me. But even before we stopped being friends, there was this one day that Kacchan suddenly couldn't be in the same room as my dad without glaring at him or being legitimately terrified, which was weird even for the toddler version of him. And so one day, I asked him why he did that, and he said it was because he saw my dad, use a quirk other than fire breathing. I'm sorry, what? He said he saw him trip over his desk. He was really clumsy, and bump his head so hard against the floor it started bleeding, but then suddenly my dad held a hand over his wound and healed it. Crazy, right? Hopefully. So of course I didn't believe him, because how could my dad have a fire-breathing and a healing quirk? It's just not possible. He didn't talk to me for a few days because of that, unless he was either interrogating me about him or demanding that I try to give my dad a paper cut, so he's forced to heal himself. We also didn't understand how minor paper cuts were back then, but eventually he gave in and stopped talking about it. It may have been the one time I've seen him give up on something, the only time I've ever seen him have such an unrealistic theory, too, Midoriya said in amazement, and Shota could relate. Bakugo seemed like, and definitely was, the type to hold a grudge against someone for something minor. So to just forget about it, even if it definitely was just a delusion, was pretty uncharacteristic of him. But even if he stopped bringing it up, I don't think he ever really got over it. Ah, there's the Bakugo he knows. Also, what? Midoriya must have noticed his face screaming, "Elaborate, bitch," because he continued his little tale. He was unsurprisingly smug with himself when my dad left to work overseas, so I guess he still hated him or something, but what was really strange was that he didn't just dislike my dad, he disliked anything that reminded him of him, which was, well, a lot more than I expected. Ah, so that's why he was significantly more terrified than others when you tested out your father's glare on them. Shota stands by his previous statement. He wishes he was there to see the thing live instead of from the perspective of the security camera. But oh well, seeing Mineta pass out from shock was good enough for him, no matter the quality. But there's more besides that. Oh, the underground hero quirked an eyebrow, prompting the boy to keep talking. As I said before, my dad also liked to analyze quirks, even more than me, except whenever he did it, he didn't focus on how to improve it, or how to use it as a hero did, but more on how to, exploit it? And not just the basic weaknesses that the quirk user would probably tell them in a lighthearted conversation, but the things that could legitimately make them lock themselves in their homes in paranoia. I think I'm being too dramatic, actually. He knew it. He knew it. He fucking knew it. With all the secret geniuses floating around the Midoriya family, he knew there had to be at least one person with an edgy personality, and of course it was the enigma of Hisashi Midoriya. I mean, it was smart, of course, because heroes need to know that sort of thing when they're taking down villains, but my dad was the pettier one in the family, so he always liked to do it to people who pissed him off. Yeah, Shota is mildly terrified of the guy, but he also really wants to buy him coffee for being what he considers a great influence on the next generation of kids. I assume Bakugo pissed him off at some point. Why the hell did he throw the post-it note away? He needs something to take notes of the elder Midoriya's vengeful actions on. For research purposes, of course. Yeah, it was around the time when I was still considered a late bloomer instead of quirkless, so Kacchan was just beginning to call me Deku, and one day he made the mistake of calling me that around my dad, and basically what happened was my dad offered to watch us and Kacchan's friends. Kacchan's friends, not our friends. And if there's one thing that Shota can always painfully sympathize with, it's the self-awareness of your own deteriorating social life that you wish you were ignorant about. Where he then sat us all down and played an 80-slide presentation, including all the ways they could be eliminated without the use of quirks at any given moment. I found it pretty informative and encouraging at the time, but I can see how Kacchan and Tsubasa would disagree. Shota paused in his inner praising of the man to give his kid a concerned look. Tsubasa? Like Dr. Tsubasa? Oh, right! But nah, this was his grandson. Looked pretty similar to each other if you ignore the red wings. My dad didn't like him much either. Weirdly enough, he went missing a few months after this. The erasure hero suppressed a cough. We were all pretty creeped out, even though Dr. Tsubasa had said that the boy had just moved with his parents to another district. I guess it was plausible, but it's weird he never said goodbye. Anyway, after the whole slideshow mishap, they made sure to never call me Deku again, in the presence of my parents at least. And that whole fiasco may be one of the reasons Katon hates whenever I start muttering and writing about quirk weaknesses. Must have PTSD or something, but there's still more than that. The bushy-haired boy looked toward Shota, as if to check that he was still listening, that he hadn't gotten annoyed and wandered off like Shota assumes many others had in his life. And just for that, the gruff man tried his best to seem a little more interested and attentive than usual, which wasn't that hard since he actually was at the moment, even though the changes in his resting bitch face were about as minimal as you could get. But Midoriya was never one to ignore the little details, immediately taking note of the slightly more open eyes and dipping eyebrows as he continued his explanation. The rest was pretty similar to the glare, even though none of them were nearly as accurate to my dad's as I intended them to be. Not nearly as accurate. The glare that had Vlad puking up his lunch at the end of last Monday wasn't even the full power of this glare. What is this, some strange, demented version of One for All, where Midoriya's similarities to his dad had a 0 to 100% scale? Does it have a cheesy name, like All for One or some... Nope, didn't think that comment through. Suppress the Kamino memories and the supervillain's escape last month and move on. Apparently we both have the same weird smile we do in situations that we probably shouldn't be smiling. Like villain fights, or, in my dad's case, movies where the antagonist murders everyone and leaves the audience broken and depressed. Or more accurately, whenever Katon randomly managed to trip over something in an embarrassing, not that I would say that to his face, way. We both have freckles too, and the same style of hair, and you know what? Katon has a lot of reasons to hate my existence now that I think about it. Shota mulled over the kid's words before a Cheshire grin slowly slithered across his face, and an idea popped into his head. An unofficial course of action, if you will, or as Aizawa will say to Nemuri if she ever catches wind of his true motives. If the freckles, hair, and analysis are constant reminders of your father to Bakugo, are you implying that the so-called weird smile may act as a catalyst to putting him over the edge? There's no point in sugarcoating his words like he did last week for the glaring. Midoriya has been in his company for too long at this point to buy that, but he's also been in his company too long to waste time considering the moral dilemma either. So that's exciting. It might, Midoriya said thoughtfully, lost in his own world until Shota waved his hand in the Baka Squad's direction, specifically the explosive blonde himself, the overly innocent expression on his face, screaming, "Then why not test it out? What harm could it possibly do?" Midoriya seemed to agree, or find the value in these experiments as, after a few seconds of calculating the risks, not that there would be any more now that Shota knows the full history of their relationship and realizes that Bakugo's short temper stems beyond just regular annoyance and onto previously full-on harassment, he finally gave it a try. "Kachan!" The red-eyed boy stopped what he was doing, which was probably trying to ignore Kirishima's manly stories, as he heard the name that could have only come from one person ring out across the cafeteria. Was Shota a little disappointed that his hiding spot had been so easily given away? Yes, but this was more than worth it. Bakugo angled his neck to the left to look at them, perpetual scowl still present but his eyes wider than usual for a reason that Shota can only assume is that he's surprised Midoriya's even talking to him today, even though it's only been a bit over an hour since their little argument. Usually it wouldn't be surprising, but ever since Hound Dog's apparent instructions to Midoriya to express anger more often, it's quite a drastic change. Speaking of the bright-eyed boy, Shota turned away from Bakugo to see what exactly the smile really was. Oh. The kid's innocent expression slowly but surely started morphing into a picture the underground hero had a hard time placing, his eyes fading away from forest green to, well, it wasn't that venomous green he had known to expect with the glare. Instead it was this sage-like color that tiptoed the thin line between green and gray, a sort of blankness pulling inside of them that expressed both complete awareness and utter exhaustion, of everything and nothing at once. The corners of his mouth spread to a deceivingly normal length, the disturbing essence of it not lying in its shape so much as what it implied. It wasn't crazed, extreme, or sharp as he expected it to be, so much as it was just soft, disarming. It's the kind of smile you'd receive from a neighbor, a casual acquaintance, or even a kind stranger on the street. You didn't know their life or personality or anything else about them, really. What you saw was strictly surface level to the extent that their future actions were nothing but a mystery to you. They could either be your friend or the person who'd end up killing you, but you wouldn't know. You wouldn't have a clue. Because despite the charisma and what you perceived as wisdom from them, they're nothing but a background character in your life, a threat you didn't know existed until it was too late. A threat you will never be strong nor smart enough to stop before it strikes you and everything you stand for down into dust. I'm sorry, and this still isn't completely accurate to Hisashi Midoriya. But right now that threat was sitting right in front of him, directing its passion, yet apathy, at Bakugo, who despite all of his shortcomings most definitely did not deserve to feel the horror that Shota assumes he is feeling as a result of this facial distortion. In fact, just to make sure of his theory, Shota turned around and prepared a long speech saying that if the explosive boy needed to take a day off tomorrow for his mental health, he would be in no way opposed to that. Oh, he's heading over here. Bakugo, with eyes as wide as saucers, so he guesses he still wasn't completely wrong, stomped his way over to Shota and Midoriya's dark table in the corner, dragging Todoroki along with him by the back of his shirt collar that he gripped with microscopically trembling hands. Both the Baku squad and Deku squad were looking after them, with the former being confused at its leader's actions and the latter yelling at him to stop kidnapping their friend at once. But of course neither listened. Finally, Bakugo made it to their table, shoving a confused Midoriya to the left to make room for himself and dumping a blank-faced and slack-bodied Todoroki on the table. "Jig is up, hobo," Bakugo began darkly, ignoring the "that's mean, Kachan" from Midoriya. "You can either explain how the hell you brainwashed Deku or I'll force half and half to make theories about it on his own, and we both know that shit's gonna be way worse than what actually happened." "That's fair, but no thank you." "Hello to you too, Bakugo. So the smile does set you over the edge, then." He stated his observation out loud, reaching over Todoroki to grab his forgotten post-it note. Notes are essential right now. "Huh?" the blonde choked out. "I haven't been brainwashed, Kachan," Midoriya huffed with a pout. "And even if I was, you still aren't allowed to force Shotan into using his hobby for your own personal gain." "Huh?" Bakugo turned his glare from the heroics teacher to the green-haired hero student. "Who the fuck is Shochan?" Notes are so fucking essential right now. Midoriya gave his classmate a weird look before tipping his head in Todoroki's direction, and that's when even more shit hit the already extensively polluted fan. "What? Shochan?" The boy's eyes flashed with expected confusion, unjustified but also expected anger, and what Shota didn't trust himself to label as what could possibly be betrayal? Now that's strange. "Why the hell would you... You can't... It's not just... Fuck! It's such a babyish fucking name, it makes me want to puke, shitty nerd." Shota paused in his note-taking to stare at Bakugo, as did Midoriya and Todoroki. Altogether, it was 3 pairs of eyes directing their incredulous stares at the ash-blonde boy, who just spat words out of his mouth that they will try and fail to understand. Suddenly, the green-eyed boy turned to the tired teacher and whispered, "I need help reacting to something." "Yeah, he does too." Shota shrugged in response, still giving a disbelieving stare in Bakugo's direction. "Fuck if I know. It's just so embarrassing for him." "Fuck you, eyebags. The only person who's going to feel embarrassed here is you when Katy Perry wannabe over here spews his shitty theories about you." Bakugo gave a shove to the now irritated Todoroki, the unspoken command hanging in the air. The heterochromatic-eyed boy let out a small sigh as he slowly sat up on the table, taking the small brown notebook out of his pocket, the same one that strikes fear into Shota's heart ever since last Wednesday when the boy gave him just a single glimpse of what horrors rested inside, and stared blankly at one of the pages before beginning to speak. "There is a method to my madness, Bakugo. I do not come up with my theories about anything at any time. My theories are an art form that stems from extensive research and as much fact-checking as I am legally allowed access to. When you had brought me over here just a few seconds ago, I did not have anything prepared for this brainwashing that you speak of." The ash-blonde boy let out a frustrated growl as he let a few sparks fly off his hands. The red and white-haired boy rolled his eyes. "At least, not brainwashing by my definition. If by brainwashing you mean inhabiting a set of traits for reasons unknown to you and many others, then I do have one theory that you may find satisfactory, one I was urged to put a stop to by the very man sitting at this table." Todoroki shifted his eyes to the underground hero, and suddenly he was very much regretting ever trying to look into Midoriya's father. He couldn't possibly be referring to that theory, right? The one with him and Midoriya's mother. Nope, don't get too into details. Shota was sure he invalidated all claims about that last week when it was first brought up, and as far as he knew, that was the only proof Todoroki had managed to gather on the matter. So, it should be over and done with, yes? Todoroki gave up on that theory, and he's just referring to something else he thought Shota discouraged, hopefully the one with Vlad King and Toga Himiko. But then again, when has any member of the problem trio given up on something? Come on, Shota, think. What other pieces of evidence for this could Todoroki have gathered? He knows he was never in the company of Inko Midoriya at any point this week, nor did he ever leave false custody papers lying around when anyone could find them. and it's not like he and the kid had actually made contact with each other outside of Hero or school matters before. Well, as long as you don't count the whole trip to the Shizuoka Mall yesterday, since apparently the Musatafa one didn't have the specific pieces of Hero merchandise that Midoriya needed for his gigantic collection. Oh. Oh no. Shizuoka Mall, located in the Shizuoka Prefecture, as most likely everyone can assume, and most importantly, the residence of one Shoto Todoroki. Actually, now that he thinks about it, didn't the boy have a new backpack today, different than last week's? A backpack that had a new tag with the logo of a high-end clothing store that Shota had passed by without a second thought because he was too busy trying to keep up with Midoriya, who was searching for more Mirko keychains like a shark out for blood. And wasn't his expression eerily similar to the one you would usually find on the face of an exhausted parent watching over their hyperactive kid? He could have recorded everything they said. He could have taken photos. He might have even interviewed the cashier lady that he can't remember the name of because, goddammit, he doesn't have supernatural memory like Midoriya. Midoriya, who at all costs can never hear about this theory if Shota wants to prevent embarrassment not only for himself and the boy, but for everyone within a 10-foot range. No. Shota rasped out desperately, causing Bakugo to sit up straighter in interest, and Midoriya to give him a concerned look. Todoroki gave a sympathetic nod, but opened his notebook wider nonetheless. Yes. A crackling static sound resounded around the large room. Attention, students. Nezu's chipper voice rang out. Nezu? When the hell did Nezu get back here? He can't possibly be back yet. Shota still has... He doesn't have anything. It's 2:30 p.m. on a Monday, and his last hour has just dried up. It's over. I have returned. Oh, and Aizawa-kun, please make your way to my office at the earliest convenience. No. Oh, yes. Aside from the clicking of Todoroki's pen, the sounds of Bakugo shifting in his seat to get a closer look at the notebook, and Midoriya's wide eyes flickering back and forth between Shota's own astonished one and the loudspeaker, his face pale and frozen as if he had lost track of the countdown timer to the end of their positions as well, there was only one thing on the underground hero's mind, or stomach, or heart. Something, a thought or a feeling or a bone-deep ache, that was everything and nothing at once. Something he couldn't even come close to comprehending, even if he tried. And, geez, he really needed help reacting to something. All right, listeners, this concludes the first half to Chapter 8. I have to break this one up into two parts, too, because this is about the halfway point for this one as well. And I thought this was a good stopping point because the next half of this is going to cover the rest of the fic, obviously, but it'll cover the conversation between Shota and Nezu. And I am really excited to finish up reading the rest of this one. Let me know your thoughts and reactions to this fic so far, especially this chapter. And as always, thank you so much for listening.